Hello and welcome to my Skul the Hero Slayer guide, part 1. In this video we'll go over the witch traits, whether or not your damage is magical or physical, the different adventurer fights, the first boss, and some tips and tricks. It is important for me to establish that this video is being recorded in early access. The game has not had its official release yet, so some of the information is subject to change. However, in saying that, a lot of the core ideas that I'll talk about will still be relevant later on. Now, one of the first NPCs you'll come into contact with is the Witch, and she is responsible for your traits. This is the permanent progression system. As you play through the game and defeat enemies, you will earn Dark Quartz, which you then bring back to her and spend to permanently upgrade your character. Now, obviously, you'll want to fill all of these out as soon as you possibly can. They all give a pretty sizable difference in your power. However, some of these stand out more than others. First and foremost, we have Flexible Spine. This is probably the most powerful and the most game-changing of all of the traits the Witch has to offer. When maxed out at 2 out of 2, the Flexible Spine trait makes your dash invincible for 0.3 seconds. Normally, you are unable to dash through enemies' attacks or through projectiles. However, if you have Flexible Spine maxed out at 2 out of 2, you are able to dash through attacks with invincibility. They won't hurt you at all. This truly is a game changer, and often this one trait being filled in can lead players to get even further in their runs than they were previously able to. In Skul, obtaining some new powerful items can be an incredible boost to your run, and the best way to obtain items is often the shop. However, these items do not come for free, and at times they are not cheap either. So being able to sell your unwanted items as you go through your run, maybe they're not suitable for your build, or maybe you just don't like them. Either way, being able to get some cash back for your unwanted items is incredibly handy on your runs. In Skul, all of the different rooms are separated by doorways, and you can tell which rooms lead to what kind of reward based on the decorations of the doors. For example, the plain-looking doorway like this will simply have gold at the end waiting for you. The doorways decorated with chests and piles of rewards will have an item waiting for you at the end. The green doorways will have a new skull waiting for you at the end. The blue-looking doors are shops. These red doors lead to an adventurer fight. And finally, the very large doorways with light blue flames on either side lead to the area's boss battle. Next, I need to go over one of the most important things in the game that I feel new players should know, and that is being able to tell what type of damage you are dealing. Items like the Carleon Sword here, for example, increase physical attack by 30%, whereas the Water Spirit inflicts magical damage. But you might be asking yourself, how can I tell whether or not I'm doing physical or magical damage with my attacks and skills? And I'm pleased to say there are two very easy ways of identifying this, and that is one, through the color of the text in the tooltips. As you can see, the Carleon Sword's physical attack wording is highlighted orange. In the Water Spirit's text, magic damage is highlighted blue. And then items like the Draft Stone that increase both physical and magical still separate the difference by highlighting the text appropriately. You can then physically see what type of damage you're doing by the color of the numbers when you do an attack. Skul's basic attack, for example, gives me yellow-colored numbers, therefore it's physical. However, if I use his Skull Toss attack, the number is blue, indicating that it is a magical attack. So now we know that items like the Carleon Sword that increase physical will boost his basic attack, and then items like the Hate Stone that increase magical attack will make his Skull Toss stronger. It's pretty typical to say that most of the skulls in the game do physical damage with their basic attack and magical damage with their skills and swap-ins. However, this isn't true for every single case, so it's important for you to experiment and figure out what type of damage your skull does. Does it do physical with its basic attack? And does it do magical with its swap-in attack and its skills? Knowing the difference in damage types and knowing what kind of damage your skulls are doing is incredibly important, because that way you'll be able to purchase the right items to make stronger builds and give you a better chance of winning. I'll be making a more comprehensive items guide going over the different items, their synergies, and how they work with skulls later on, so stay tuned for that. Now, I need to go over something that kind of gets ignored a lot, and that's totems. Totems are these unique little structures. You may have seen them before. These things are there to buff your enemies, and you can usually see a glowing aura around whoever is getting the buffs. The wonderful thing is, if you smash them, you will temporarily gain whatever kind of buff that it was giving to the good guys. The red swords give a damage boost, the green cross heals over time, The blue wings give an attack and movement speed boost. And last but certainly not least, we have the most dangerous totem of all, the shield totem. I'm not going to mince words here. You smash this. You smash it like your life depends on it. You see, after you break this one, you'll gain a nice little shield that absorbs a set amount of damage. However, it prevents your enemies from being staggered whenever they're hit and reduces the damage they take. You might know this as super armor or hyper armor. This totem is very, very deadly and leads to a lot of unnecessary damage or deaths. You have been warned. Chances are, if you've done a few runs, you've rescued the Fox and Ogre NPCs. These guys return to home base and give you skulls and items to start your runs off. They'll even give you 2 skulls and items if you pay a small fee of dark quartz. 2 very cool things I want you to know is that the skulls and items that are given are normally common quality, but do have a chance to be rare. This can be a huge boost to your damage and overall effectiveness, and you haven't even left the castle yet. The second totally cool thing I want you to know is that the skulls and items given to you by these NPCs can be given twice. Yes, the exact same skulls and items. Normally in the game, you can only carry 1 of any given skull or item, no duplicates allowed. However, these NPCs don't seem to care about the rules whatsoever. Items will also stack their effects, including their inscriptions. Getting a duplicate item is quite rare, but if you do manage it, I'll think you're very, very cool. Buffs. Regardless of how you get them, you want them. Buffs can be found in the lower part of the screen next to your health bar. The icons tell you what item or effect is active. If the icon is a solid block, that means it's a passive effect that is constantly working. Icons that rotate are showing how long they're active for until they're finished. A lot of people, myself included, have had no idea how the Draftstone works. It gives 30% physical and magical damage to soldier skulls, but which ones are those? These are sword, spear, shield, and bomber skulls. They all have the word skeleton in front of their name to make it a little bit easier to identify them. Now, if I have the Draftstone equipped and I swap to the sword skull, we can see the Draftstone's icon appear below. This tells us that the item is currently working. However, if I swap back over to another skull that isn't affected by Draftstone, the buff disappears. If you're ever unsure about whether an item or effect is actually working, consider taking a glance at your buffs. Okay, it's time to go over the Adventurer mini-boss fights. These guys act as the halfway point for each area, and which adventurer shows up is completely random. But the first one should always be the swordsman. He has a few attacks to go over, so let's get started. First of all, his ranged projectile. He fires a small homing orb from his hand. There's a few good tricks to dealing with this. You can jump up and over the orb, forcing it to turn around, run back under it, and do a circular motion. Or, if you've remembered what I said earlier, then you know the flexible spine trait is fantastic. Thanks to the invincibility that it gives us, we can actually dash headfirst into the orb and take no damage. On top of that, it destroys the projectile in the process. This technique works on roughly 90% of the range attacks in the game. His next attack is a 3-swing combo with his sword. It has tracking on each individual swing, so even if you dash past him to his backside, he'll turn around to meet you. I recommend moving away from him and just not being close at all. Next up is probably his worst attack. He raises his sword straight up in the air and causes a magical explosion all around him. This attack comes out pretty slow, so you should have plenty of time to move away from the attack. Lastly, we have his ultimate attack. All of the adventurers have them and will start using them once they're at and below 50% of their health. The sword boy here powers up and swings his sword, firing a large wave projectile towards you. This is one of the easiest ultimate attacks to avoid, so don't worry too much. You can easily jump up and dash straight over it. Or, if you have that gorgeous flexible spine trait, you can even dash through it. Be warned though, you'll need a skull who at the very least has a double dash to do this. Many power type skulls only have a single dash and may not make it past the projectile entirely and may still be hit. Now, while all the adventurers do have ultimate attacks, you don't have to just sit there and deal with it. If you're able to inflict enough damage while they're powering up, you can break their cast and stun them for a short time, giving you even more of a chance to punish them for their actions. Do take note though, as you progress through the game, breaking an ultimate attack from an adventurer takes more and more damage. Sometimes it's good to know when you just haven't got enough damage and be ready to dodge. Okay, on to the archer and her first attack. She'll fire an arrow straight up into the air, targeting where you're currently standing. You'll see a red glowing telegraph below you, warning you where the arrow is going to land. As long as you aren't standing still and waiting to receive her gift head first, you'll be fine. Secondly, she'll take aim and fire an arrow straight at you. Just jump over it, it's not really an issue at all. If you have flexible spine, you can even dash through all of these attacks as well. If you get right up close to her, she may bat you away with her bow. This doesn't do any damage, but is usually followed up immediately with an attack. She will also plant traps on the ground using little apples as bait. But Skul is undead and does not care for apples. Don't step on them. Or do, if you really want to. I mean, I'm not your dad or anything. Her ultimate attack has her fire a volley of arrows into the air, targeting a large patch of ground underneath where you're standing. Now, of course, you could break her cast if you think you have the damage, but alternatively, you can cheese this attack by running to the opposite side of the screen as she charges. Wait for her to fire the attack, and then simply run back to her. The attack always targets wherever you're standing when the attack is first fired, but does not track afterwards. Have fun leading this to wherever you want it to go. Next up is the Paladin. He's pretty easy though. His first and only ranged attack sees him leaping through the air with the grace of a gazelle before slamming down to the ground. It tracks the same way the archer's arrows do, so he'll always jump to where you're currently standing, meaning you have a lot of time to move out of the way. His second attack is actually a bit faster. He'll stand facing the camera with his mace pointing down before thrusting it, causing a quake. This is pretty much identical to the quake attack the larger tree enemies in Act 1 do. Just jump up to avoid it. He'll sometimes raise a shield up, which blocks all damage coming from the front and stops you from dashing through him. Just jump up and go over him. His ultimate attack is a large whirling spin that follows you across the screen. He's still slower than you, so jumping up and dashing over his head is the safest way to avoid him until he's done. The priest girl is pretty straightforward. She only has one attack. She'll point her staff at you and summon a large magical cross targeting your location. Once again, similar to the archer's arrows and the paladin's leap. The difference here is that it's quite fast, meaning you better be prepared to dash or be running. She repeats this attack 3 times in a row before she's finished. Keep an eye on the ground below you to make sure you've moved far enough in between each cross attack. She also has a teleport, which she'll use to try and get away from you. She always teleports as far from you as she can, so if you happen to be closer to one corner, you know that she's going to the other one. She has a very powerful healing spell that she can channel, indicated by the big green aura around her. This heals for massive chunks of HP, so naturally you want to get over there and beat her up. A few hits will interrupt the cast. I'm going to mention it now, but all adventurers have healing potions that they'll chug from here and there. The healing effect is actually very small, so consider this a free damage window and continue beating them up. Moving on to her ultimate, it's once again a big healing spell. Just keep swinging away at her and avoid her cross attack, and she's easy. Next up is the Sorceress. She's actually very straightforward because she only has 2 attacks. Her first and most common one is her Flurry of Fireballs. She gives you almost a full 2 seconds of warning before she fires them. Just keep an eye out for this stance. You can run, dash, or jump to avoid them. Honestly, they aren't very hard to deal with once you know they're coming. If you're still having trouble, try running away from her to make some space before she shoots. You'll have plenty of time and room to avoid them. Her second attack is a fiery plunging ground slam. Once again, she likes to show off and give you plenty of warning before she does it. All you need to do is not stand under her and you're fine. Something to note is that she flies above the ground for the entire fight, usually at a height that makes it very hard to hit her from the ground, so jump attacks are your only real option. But after she does this ground slam, she'll float lower to the ground than before. Once she is this low to the ground, a lot of skulls can now reach her with their grounded attacks. And then finally we have her ultimate, which does look scarier than it really is. She summons 3 flaming orbs in the sky that will each fire 2 fireballs toward you. They're slower than her normal ones, but also larger. There's a lot of ways to avoid these, but my personal recommendation is to stay close to the middle of the room at first. The orb on the far left of the screen is always summoned and shoots first, going in order across the screen from left to right. With some very slight movements, you can bait and avoid the fireballs from that orb, then quickly dash past and avoid the others from the right side of the screen. This means you don't have to jump much at all, which is something that a lot of people will instinctively want to do, and sometimes leads to more trouble. The last adventurer to go over is the ninja, considered by many to be the most difficult to deal with. His first attack has him teleport to a corner and then throw out a large shuriken that travels roughly half the screen before returning to him. The shuriken itself can deal a lot of damage as it hits multiple times while you're in contact with it. However, it's fairly slow and can be avoided simply by jumping over it or dashing through it. This attack is important because it leaves the ninja very exposed to being hit while he waits for it to return to him. So avoid the shuriken and begin attacking him while you have the chance. Just don't forget it's behind you and does come back. His next attack is a very fast horizontal dashing slash. All of the ninja's movements begin and end with him teleporting, indicated by a puff of smoke. He'll appear close to you, pause for a moment, and then dash towards you. Jumping is the only practical way to avoid this attack unless you have flexible spine, in which case you can also dash towards him. His third and final normal attack has him appear on the ground before leaping high into the air. He'll then throw 3 small shurikens in a spread pattern towards you. Flexible spine once again lets you dash into these projectiles no problem. Otherwise, you can run from the ninja and then dash or jump and dash to escape them. Because the spread of the shurikens widens the further they travel, it gives you a wider gap to move through, similar to the sorceress's ultimate fireball attack we covered earlier. Lastly, his ultimate attack is a little different. He teleports to the middle of the screen and begins powering up the same as the others would. However, this is the ultimate. While he's focusing, clones will appear one at a time and attack you. They use both his horizontal slash and his jumping shuriken attacks. 4 clones will appear and attack, and then the ultimate is over. This ultimate can be very hard for some people to completely avoid, so here are some tips. Firstly, because this attack is actually just repeating 2 of his normal moves, I recommend getting used to avoiding those first. Practice makes perfect. Then for the meantime, whenever he performs this ultimate, rather than focusing on damaging him, focus on simply not getting hit and staying alive through it. The shuriken throwing clones will always appear in the upper corners, so the shurikens themselves have quite a lot of spread. Because of this, preemptively jumping before a clone appears can be very helpful. If the clone that appears is the ground one, you can simply do a double jump or continue dashing in the air to avoid touching the ground and being hit. If the clone that appears is throwing shurikens, you still have time to find a gap and fit through it. Once you're more confident with avoiding these attacks, then begin dealing damage at the same time, even if it's just a few hits here and there. The ninja can seem very random, but with practice he goes down just like the others. Okay, it's time to go over the first boss of the game, Yggdrasil. His first attack has him raise both of his fists into the air before quickly slamming one down at you. He will do this twice in a row. His body will shake and he'll let out a small grunt just before he throws a fist. Which fist that he uses is actually chosen depending on which one you're closer to. If you're on the left side, expect the fist that's closest to you and vice versa. Thanks to this, you can preemptively know which hand is coming and be ready to dash to avoid it. Remember, he does this twice in a row, so once you avoid the first fist, be ready for the second, which is also chosen based on which one you're closest to at the time. His fists are solid, so you can briefly stand on them to attack his head when they're on the ground. Additionally, there are 2 green platforms on either side of him and 2 protruding branches coming from him that you can stand on as well. For his second attack, he'll move his hands off screen and then sweep horizontally. Just like the first attack, he does this move twice in a row and has a large giveaway to tell you which side the hands are coming from. Keep an eye on his body, as he'll strongly lean towards whichever hand is coming. You can jump up and dash over the hand, dash into it with flexible spine, or preemptively move onto one of the green platforms for better height. He'll do any combination of these 2 attacks, the fist pound and wavy slap. After that, he moves on to his third attack. Yggdrasil will lower his head and begin charging purple energy. He'll then fire 1 very large projectile and a spray of smaller ones. The smaller orbs are always spread in the same pattern, but the large orb aims at where you are. He fires this attack 3 times back to back before collapsing to the ground to recover. While his head is on the ground, take the opportunity to lay into him with big damage. To best avoid the attack, I recommend running away to either side as he charges the attack up, and then jump up and over the large orb as it comes towards you. If you're still airborne when the next orb is being fired, it'll aim higher, so you may get the chance to simply walk underneath. Flexible Spine shines again, letting you dash through these attacks. I recommend avoiding the first 2 sets of orbs at a distance, and then using your dash to bypass the final one, leaving you nice and close to Yggdrasil's head to get the most damage on him. After he's done recovering, the cycle repeats until he's defeated. Remember to keep an eye out for his warnings and evade where you need to. Thank you very much for watching, everyone. I do hope this was helpful to you in some way. In the next guide video, I'll go into more detail about some of the better items in the game, including quintessences, item synergies, and what to look out for in Act 2. If you have any questions about what I've said in the video, feel free to ask in the comments and I'll do my best to help. Thanks again, everyone. I'll see you next time. Have a good one.